Hi, welcome back to Books for Thought. For this month, the June episode, I'm really excited because we have the lovely Ruth Vennekens from HZ University of Applied Sciences in Holland with us. And we're going to be talking about 2 degrees today. We're going to be looking at industrial engineering with management, as well as a global product and change management. 2 very interesting courses. Certain amounts of overlapping. We'll be discussing how they're different, how they're similar. And of course, Ruth has brought for us today her 2 picks, 1 fiction, 1 nonfiction, with regard to books that could help someone interested in either one of these degrees. So Ruth, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I guess I'd like to start out with, could you tell us more about how you ended up studying what you studied? Tell us a bit about your path and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, sure. The funny thing is, when I was in high school, I had a focus on everything because everything is interesting in my personal view. And I couldn't really focus on one subject. So at a certain point, I needed to pick a study, and I found industrial engineering and management because it's a really broad study. And I studied in the evening hours because I was already working due to my wide interest. And I was working in the railroad sector at that time. So I was, at the same time, I was working on all these rail projects and building railroads and stuff like that. And in the evening hours, I would study industrial engineering and management. And when I finished my education, I kept working for a while in mainly project management, but I had this really big interest in sustainability. So I was also always doing all those side projects that had to do with making the way we work more sustainable, more corporate social responsible. And then at a certain point, I got this job at Hirema Fabrication Group, which is a company that creates oil platforms. And that sounds really off if you look at sustainability, but the interesting part was that I worked at the innovation department. So I could actually still work at making companies more sustainable. And while I was working there, I saw this job coming on my screen as a lecturer of industrial engineering and management. And I was looking into a new challenge. That's one thing that's always very important for me, to always keep looking for those challenges and learning more and seeing how I can help people evolve and grow. So I was really interested in this job and I went for it and I got it. So that's basically how I ended up at university. What I really like about it is that the university is not a theoretical university, but it's an applied science university. So we mainly teach bachelor programs, and we really focus on how to apply all these theoretical knowledge and all these experiences in real life problems, real life challenges that companies face, that society faces. So we can actually build up towards students that have this applied knowledge where they can actually have their ideas in the world and their added value to the companies. So yeah, that's how I ended up at university. I started with the program Industrial Engineering and Management by teaching a lot of subjects, communication and research subjects and business-oriented subjects, and also the sustainable and the corporate social responsibility subjects. And by now, that is my main focus in which I teach. During my work, I also started studying myself again in the evening hours. So at this point, I am studying environmental sciences, which is completely in line with the sustainability. And last year, we started to develop the new program, Global Project and Change Management. And I was invited to think along with what should be in the program, how we could make it this holistic program where we will try to focus on global problems rather than local problems, but from the perspective of the local area. So we call that glocalization. which basically means that you have this global problem and you can work on it on a local scale, but you will always have to look at the global effect of it. And once you solve it on a local scale, you can also see if you can then from there solve it on a global scale. So that's the main focus of the education, is really to work towards a more sustainable corporate social responsible world. So yeah, that really fits with my enthusiasm for this subject. And that's basically how I got to work there, and how I got to work in these two programs as well.
I think that's really interesting, and also the idea of, sustainability being a large part of both of these areas, particularly the global project and change management degree. What do you think, what areas do you feel that students are going to be able to have a large impact in after they study a degree like this?
Well, it really depends. If you look at industrial engineering and management, students will mainly focus on companies and in-company improvements, because that program is really focusing at the improvement of processes. But what you see in this day and age is that basically every company faces these challenges that are linked to sustainability, that are linked to corporate social responsibility. So students are not asked to improve processes for a bigger profit only, or for shorter lead times, but all the solutions have to be more sustainable or have to be corporate social responsible. So for those students, what they will get out of it, or the impact that they are going to have, is that they have this holistic view on the improvement within companies and how those improvements impact the outside world, the environment, the social environment, but also the actual natural environment, the ecological environment. Then if you look at global project and change management, these students really will become the change makers. They will have a bigger outlook, so they don't look at a particular company, or maybe not even a particular small group of companies, but they will look at the network of companies. You will find these students way more in maybe consultancy agencies, but also in these networks of companies that are focusing on particular challenges that we face. One really big challenge could be, for instance, the energy challenge, where we have to transit from more polluting methods of gaining energy towards sustainable energy sources, which could be the solar energy or wind energy. But then they will also look at the impact of those energy sources. So to cut it short, basically the difference even is that the industrial engineering and management student is focusing on this company scale, or a little bit bigger than company scale, and the global project and change management student or graduate will have a way bigger focus. They will focus on the impact within a company, but mainly on how these companies or organizations together can really go into that system transformation where we will create that better world. Leaving aside what that better world would be, because that will be a completely different discussion, going way more into ethics. But I think the impact that the students will have in global project and change management is that they will be the leaders for change towards those subjects.
Right. So essentially, there are maybe similar tasks, similar focuses in terms of content, but the way that those focuses are going to be implemented, and the impact they could have, that's different. No, one is on a smaller scale and one is on a much larger scale. But either way, they're both very focused on the future, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's another difference which is quite big, because when you look at industrial engineering and management, you even hear it in the name. It's focused at industrial engineering, so it's more the technical field. Whereas global project and change management is a holistic approach. So they don't really focus on just the technical field, but also on the social field, on the economic field. So they are not within one domain of education, but basically in all the domains that we offer. They're overarching.
Which is something that is becoming more and more important in our society, no? And I think that in the book that you chose for book one, which is Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari, we can see how all of these different areas really come together and are going to, it's going to be really important that we analyze them, we understand them, if we want to have a clear idea of where we're going and how we're going to get there, as well as maybe if we agree with where we're going and how we're getting there right now, or if maybe we want to be modifying things.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, because on the one hand, what you see when you look at the past, and that's what he actually does, he looks at the past to kind of create this image of the future, which would be a possible image of the future. But it's not said that that would be the exact image. It's even so that in his book itself, he at one point refers to Marx, his ideology, and he says, like, okay, Karl Marx wrote this manifest and people read it, and by reading it, they did not go for that future that was predicted, but they chose another path. So by reading works like this, you can either say, okay, this is how the future will be like, or you can read it and then use it as maybe a warning or a manifest. He himself says, I don't want to write a manifest because I'm a scientist. I don't want to go into the politics. But nonetheless, he gives a really clear view on how he feels or thinks the future will look like. And that could either be how it will turn out, or it will be completely different because now we have that insight. So yeah, coming from that holistic approach, what you see in the book Homo Deus is that he really ends up focusing on algorithms and on technological advancements. While maybe, and we don't know how that will turn out, maybe by everything that we're doing now, there will be a power outage. Maybe in the future, we will have to go back to how we lived decades ago. We don't know what the future will bring. We don't even know how the world will look in 10 years. So that's also something that he says in his book, but also something that we need to take into account when we look at sustainability, at corporate social responsibility, at basically every improvement that we want to make for the future. We can have an idea about how we think the future will be. We can have this vision and we can have a mission towards that vision, but we don't know how it will turn out because we don't have enough knowledge and capability of actually expanding what we know now and what we do now into the real consequences that it will have for the balance of our ecosystem. Right. And yeah, go ahead. You wanted to ask?
No, I was just going to say, I'm thinking about, the first book that he wrote, Sapiens.
Yeah.
He's really looking into the past even more. It's almost that idea of we need to be looking at all three, the past, the present moment, and the future, if we're going to have any chance at moving sort of smoothly into a new kind of age. And I was just wondering, what you think would be, so for someone who only reads Homo Deus, is there anything from Sapiens that you think maybe they should know about in order for the second one to make more sense?
Yeah, well, the good thing about Homo Deus is that it starts with this little introduction about our history. So there is some priming at the beginning, which is really a marketing term, but I just go for it. There's some priming at the beginning to understand the rest of the book. However, what I feel, and he also puts things in perspective. At one point, he talks about how we treat animals, for instance. And then he goes on to tell that if we create higher intelligent force or being, whether it is a cyborg type of human or an artificial intelligence, the way that we treat animals now is the way they will treat us. So if there's going to be a Homo Deus, then the way we treat animals now will be a precedence for how they will treat us, maybe. But if you look at Sapiens, what really caught my attention was how devastating humanity has been to our ecosystem. Reading Sapiens is not always a pleasant experience because there's a lot of self-reflection as human being of all the things that we've destroyed so far. And we have not destroyed it in a long period of time. And at this point, we're even increasing the speed of how much we destroy by our technological advancements. The positive thing is that when you read Homo Deus, is you get this perspective of the positive side effects of these developments and advancements. So yeah, there are some things that you could take away from Sapiens. However, Sapiens might give you this negative vibe, or maybe even get you into an existential crisis, where Homo Deus gives you an outlook of a world where we could actually work towards these improvements in our lives, where we still have to be careful and we still have to question our own ethics, our values. But if we go slow enough, then we actually might have something which we can work towards to actually better ourselves and better the way we live. So yeah, maybe
it's a warning in a way, no? But with some hope. Really, it's a message of hope at the same time that it is also maybe a bit of a warning.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, Homo Deus was more that positive outlook. However, for people who fear technological advancements, they might even get pushed further into that anxiety. But in terms of understanding how humanity operates and how we try to work towards more, because that's our main focus in life, is we want more. Humans always want more. And mind you, that's not a bad thing in itself. Again, if you talk about good and bad, you end up discussing ethics. But on a biological level, if we would not look for more, we would die out. If you find a source of food, this is also something that he explains in his book, but if you look for a source of food and you found it, what you're going to do is eat it. And then if you would be completely satisfied and you would not look for more, that would be it. You eat that perfect meal and then it's enough. And then you don't go look for more food, you die. So looking for more food and looking for more satisfaction is something that is inherently linked to being alive. It's not something that only humans do, it's something that animals do too. So if you look at Homo Deus from that perspective, where humanity destroys everything and we're bad beings, and you get into that ethics discussion of what is right and what is wrong and what should be and what should not be, then yeah, it might be just as depressing as Sapiens. But if you look at it from a way of how do humans operate and how can we use that mode of operation towards a system change where we find ways to deal with that ever quest for more, that we can actually work towards improvements that help the entire ecology, the entire ecosystem, then I think it's a very positive message. So
What we're
this,
talking about in terms of that quest for more and looking at how we can modify it or control it, we are essentially talking about sustainability again. No, it's not just a term for when we're talking about the environment or nature. It really is within the social sciences, and with anything we do, sustainability has to be a very important element at this point, you know.
yeah.
Human.
Yeah, and I think that the fun fact that with this change of focus that we have now, when we look at the focus of maybe even only 70 years back, 75 years back, the focus was on ending wars. And if you go back even 50 years more, so 125 years back, the quest that humanity had was get rid of diseases. And if you go back a little bit more, the quest was to make sure that everyone had enough to eat. And at this point in our lives, our quests have become way more being happy, which is also a very capitalistic thought, because capitalism cannot exist without growth. And we need something that is endless to have this endless growth. And happiness, the quest for happiness, is something that is endless, because we will never be satisfied with what we have, because we have this inner urge for more. But with this new focus, something that we also look at is a better quality of life. And a better quality of life, in my view, is directly linked to sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So no matter how your political views are, our biology demands us to crave for more. And if we can put that craving into a focus where we go for, okay, we want more sustainability, we want more balance in this world, so we can keep growing, so we can keep feeding ourselves, so we can keep that balance of diversity in our flora and fauna, then eventually we will solve this challenge as well. And then we will have this sustainable world where we live in. And obviously at that point, we will have this new focus. So it's also a part of our growth to focus on sustainability at this point in our lives, because it's all around us. Not only we hear about it, but in this day and age, we even feel the effects. We notice the effects of the disbalance in the world. Looking at COVID, I mean, everyone knows about COVID at this point. We have all experienced it, but it's not something new. We could see it as a plague that became a pandemic, but we solved it. We have the vaccines, we have systems in place, and I'm not saying that these systems are pleasant for everyone, but we have systems in place that can actually tell humanity on a global scale, hey, these are solutions. We have to stay inside, we have to limit contact, we have to make sure that we wear masks, or, you know, we've got all these rules set up because we can communicate globally. And we have it in place. I'm not saying that nobody died from the pandemic. I'm not saying that no one suffered. But if you look at the impact of the pandemic on a historical scale, it's not that big. So now is the time where we can act. Yeah, now we can start looking at other challenges. So what we do is we look at the challenge of we are craving more energy from this world. And that is both in a perspective of food, as it is in a perspective of luxury, looking at the use of computers, of technology, of the internet, even capitalism. Look at the Bitcoin, how much energy we need for that. So we crave more energy. And at the same time, we know that if we use old energy sources and polluting energy sources, at one point, they will be gone. So we are looking into new energy sources, something that we've always done in order to get what we want and get more and more and more. And at the same time, we realize that we need to balance that out in order to survive. And then obviously there's the question, also pointed out in Homo Deus, do we even, and this is a political difficult question, and also on a sociological level, a difficult question. Do we as human beings even need to survive? We always want more. We have a really big value in life. The first human right is the right to live. We don't have the right to die. There's nowhere described that we have the right to die. And there's a lot of people who crave for this eternal life. We want more, more, more. And at the same time, we want that balance because we don't want to live unhappy.
Mm.
So that's where sustainability comes in. And sustainability is not something that we only look at the environment. It's a holistic approach, because to sustain, what do we want to sustain? We have to look at the question, what do we want to sustain, in order to give direction to the solutions. And if we want to sustain human life, if that is the goal, then we might make completely different decisions from the goal of sustaining our ecosystem as a whole. While as we look at the entirety of our ecosystem, then we might need to make different decisions. So it's a really interesting question. First of all, what do we want to sustain, and what do we value in life? And at the other side, is what we want to sustain and what we value even realistic? And shouldn't we look at a world that is bigger than ourselves? I don't have the answer, though. It's a philosophical question as well. But it's really interesting that what you see now in sustainability science, that we point at the problems more. If we experience something as an environmental problem, then we are going to act. And that's a very subjective way of looking at science. While at the same time, we want to be able to have this objective view about sustainability. So there's a really big contradiction in sustainability itself as well.
All right, because on the one hand, it's a science, or it's connected to multiple sciences, social sciences, but then the word ethics has come up now and again while we've been talking, and you really, I don't think you can completely divide this idea of sustainability from ethics, which, thinking about what you chose for book 2, which is the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins, we can see how the ethics are actually coming into play in this world that she's created, and how different themes connected to sustainability are used for good, bad, depending on who's reading it, I guess.
Depending on where you live, even. I mean, if you look at the Hunger Games, one theme that really connects the books is, well, I already mentioned the word priming. So you set up people, their mindsets, so you can convey a message. And what you see in Homo Deus is that one point that's pointed out is that if you want someone to move towards a certain point, you might need to rewrite history. And if you look at the Hunger Games, one thing that has been done in the world of the Hunger Games is that they wrote a history that was in line with a society which was, in essence, in balance. I'm not saying that the people were happy, but people were living in a certain type of balance. For the people who haven't read the book yet, basically in the Hunger Games, there's this capital where all the wealthy people live, and people have everything they need and even more. And then there's these 12 districts, and the closer to the capital you live, the more wealth you will know. And the further away from the capital you live, the less you will have. And every district has its own particular product that they deliver to the capital and where they live from. And the interesting part is that at the beginning of the books, you see the propaganda of the capital being the main propaganda. And the story, the narrative that they tell is actually priming the people to accept the life that they live. Where when you go through the books, at some point, there's a different narrative that's being told, and that's a narrative of the rebellion. And they use the same tactics, and it's even pointed out in the books that they use the same tactics. And you can actually relate that to how we operate in the world we live in. If you look at the discussion around Black history in the US, and actually making it illegal to teach about certain subjects, then that's changing the narrative, that's changing the history, so you can get people to a certain point. And in the books of the Hunger Games, you see it happening over and over again, that the narrative is changed and you get more insight, that the main character gets more insight in different stories. And while she learns about all the different stories, her opinion on certain movements in her world changes. At the beginning, she's just worried about her sister. And that's her world. Her world is her little family and the little district where she lives in. And by worrying about her sister, she puts herself in a new situation where all of a sudden she becomes this image where all the other districts get their power from to rebel, and they feel like, hey, we can change, we can do something different. While that little girl, the main character, just wanted to protect her sister. That's all it was about. And it put her in a situation that was so far away from the way she valued life, but she kept to her core. She stayed who she was. And by that, she became an authentic example for all the other districts. Like, hey, I can be more than what I'm now, because she showed a different world. And then she found out that even the rebellion where she ended up had these secrets. And even the rebellion was not all good. There was this really dark side about the rebellion. And she over and over changes her mind and learns, and she has this feeling like, I just want to escape this all. I think as a person, at least I myself, really relate to that feeling, that sometimes something that you learn is so overwhelming that you just want to close your eyes to it and you just want to run away. You don't want to see it. But in the end, she makes a decision that she feels is right to restore a balance. And she decides to partake in this rebellion and to actually lead this rebellion to overthrow the government. And what I really found interesting in that part is that at this point, we have this really big movement that now is led by Greta Thunberg, where she kind of is that image that we have of, we want to have a better world. While, again, there's a lot of propaganda going on. And I'm not saying that I do not support her message, because I really do. However, what I also see is that instead of changing the system, she becomes part of the system. Not because she definitely wants to, but the system's just hauling her in. Okay, we're going to talk with you. Okay, this is your spot now. This is where we want to have you. And basically, that's how the rebellion in the Hunger Games treated the main character in the book. Whereas at the same time, we have so many Greta Thunbergs in the world. We've got African Greta Thunbergs, we've got Asian Greta Thunbergs, we've got South American Greta Thunbergs, but we don't hear about them because they don't fit the propaganda. So it's really interesting to see how in this little book of the Hunger Games, we have all these little stories, and we've got these different cultures, and we've got this different type of thinking and the change of mind that comes over someone when you learn new things. And at the same time, there's this underlying quest for righteousness and balance, and also I think even for sustainability, but a little bit more towards social responsibility, in my opinion. But you have this entire storyline weaved in with the main character, where she encounters all these moments where she just needs to think about, okay, but what, in my opinion, is the correct thing to do now? Where should I go now in order to get to that better world? And that's a question that you also see in Homo Deus. Well, which steps do we need to set in order to get to that better world? Do we need to do it all at once? And then Buddhism comes in and they say, okay, but be happy with what you have. Don't go too fast, because if you go too fast, you will not overthrow the system, but you will become part of the system. So it's really interesting to read all these storylines within that one story.
And in fact, I think what you see throughout the book really was all of these things coming together. It can be a bit chaotic at times, no? Is the idea of sustainability is not, we're not going to just one day say, okay, we're sustainable now. Everything's sustainable, everything is equal and all is well. It's a constant, it's in constant flux. It's a process. Sustainability is something that needs to be sustained, needs to be maintained, needs to be constantly reflected upon, thought about, modified. Otherwise, we just end up slowly going back to the two extremes, you know, the two sides of the coin, and going back to sort of polarized perspectives that create good and evil, which obviously change depending on which side of the coin that you're on.
Yeah, definitely. And in that, at the same time, you see back that capitalistic view that we need to grow. Because once we start standing still, there's not going to be this peaceful moment where we can just enjoy what we have, but it will collapse. There will be ultimate chaos. Imagine that all of a sudden, everyone in this world is just going to be like, okay, this is fine. We're just gonna be happy with what we have. Now, for you and me, it might be okay because we are into the market of knowledge, which is one of the highest valued assets in this world at this moment. But what about the farmers? What about a farmer that is growing crops that all of a sudden says, okay, but basically I've got enough. I'm not going to sell my crops anymore. I'm good. I'm just going to spend my money in the stores. If enough people would do that, there won't be anything to spend your money on anymore. And then the entire system will collapse. So both with capitalism and with sustainability and social responsibility, we need growth. Humanity needs that growth. So yeah, that's something that you also see in both in Homo Deus and in the Hunger Games. You see that ever persistent quest for growth.
Which I think is something you see in both of the degrees that you teach on as well, correct? The need for looking at how we can grow well and how we can, as we grow, also be thinking about maintaining some kind of a balance as we're going, no? So really, both of these degrees are going to be for people who are looking to make change, to think about growth, and it's not just that idea of the environment. I think a lot of people nowadays, they would never equate global product and change management to sustainability, or industrial engineering with management to sustainability, but in reality they are very, very closely connected, and you can't look at these areas without being worried about sustainability.
Yeah, that's absolutely truth. The interesting thing is, even if you look at the ISO norm for social corporate responsibility, it's a holistic approach, and you really cannot ever do anything with these two subjects if you are not willing to look at it from the holistic approach. And within both of the programs, you need that holistic approach in order to understand even the problems that we're facing. If you look at the most basic issues in our human world, and then just go back to maybe a few years back where we were not even thinking about sustainability. And I say a few years, but even in the 70s and the 60s, we were already thinking about it. But if you look at the focus we had then, it was way more on food, and we were maybe still a little bit thinking about preventing war. We are still thinking about it. We still deal with war in the world, but it's not the main issue anymore. But you need that holistic approach to even look at food. We in the Netherlands are one of the biggest producer of meats in the world. Not maybe in the world, but in the EU, in the European Union. So I think I might be a little bit off with the numbers, but I think only 30% of what we produce is used in our own country. So 70% of what we export in meats is going to other countries. Then if you look at the impact of meat production, it's huge. We are one of the most polluting countries in the European Union. And the main factor is our meat production. But what if we would not produce that meat anymore? It doesn't mean that everyone all of a sudden becomes a vegetarian. It means that they're going to get it elsewhere. So we don't solve the problem, we shift the problem to a different space. So even to understand the complexity of the most basic needs that we humans have, and the issues that are caused by those basic needs, you need this holistic approach where you look further than only that local perspective. You need to look at, okay, but what is the basic driver behind it? And when we have that basic driver, then how are we going to analyze it? How are we going to say what impact that driver has on our local community, and then on the country, and then on the union or Europe, or maybe even on the world? And then from there, you will have to figure out, okay, but if the impact is so big, what will happen with this solution? And if we go for that solution, where will that have impact? And on the other side, you will also have to see, okay, but who do I need to solve it? Do I need only the local community to solve that global issue? Or do I need to haul in other countries and world leaders and Greta Thunbergs to help us solve this? So this holistic approach goes way further than just thinking about it and understanding that all things are connected. But within both studies, you will have to be able to connect people. And within industrial engineering and management, it will be a little bit more on a local scale. But again, you will have to think about the consequences. And in global project and change management, you are one of those people who are globally connecting people in order to solve these issues. But you will still have to work with the people within the companies, within those local communities, within these local organizations, in order to get where you want to be. That holistic approach is really everything that you need to understand, at least, in order to start moving towards your goals, if you look at sustainability.
Exactly. And so we're looking at two options for students who want to take a look at some of the big questions, but to go beyond thinking about the answers, to go beyond just that thinking stage, like you mentioned, but to really move into action, to consider the consequences, and to start driving change and creating a different, hopefully better world. And
Yeah.
the books that you chose for this month, I think they're excellent examples of why it's important to think about all of these things, and why it's essential, even, for someone who's interested in engineering or project management, which are two areas where I think we don't often think about sustainability as well. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And for the viewers, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next month. Bye.